Hello, this is Kinninigan from RagingReptilian.com. I'm actually recording the audio on a separate track this time. I don't like the audio on the Screencast-O-Matic. Yes, I'm back on video again today for the third day. So, if I snap like this, I can basically sync the audio and video up. It's a little trick. Sometimes I do it before I record, but no big deal. We're going to be decoding a Game of Thrones, but before I put this warning out there, some people may click on this video that are not familiar with the type of work I do or the type of decoding I do with mistosynchronism and TV shows, so it may not be your typical Game of Thrones mythology decoded. I'm just going to throw this out there. I watch a lot of Game of Thrones decoded videos, but no one's picked on the fact that the dragons shown in the HBO Game of Thrones, they are not dragons, they are wyverns. Wyverns, I'm sorry. Dragons have 6 limbs. Yeah, but there are dragons in Game of Thrones. In fact, there are reptilians, shape-shifting reptilians. Those are the dragons. The 3 dragons that Daenerys Targaryen has represents the serpents. Jugendmunder. I'm going to tie this all in with Nordic mythology. The name of the books, now the books are more consistent to the Ragnarök way that this was decoded. I'm going to be using source material from 2013 for someone that figured it out. This is right around the time that HBO picked up the series. In all honesty, HBO has done a lousy job on this series. They're writing, if you know anything about the books compared to the TV show, yes, there are massive, so if you're looking for like a, decoding of the modern season, we're not getting into that. There's too many characters in Game of Thrones to actually go through. But I am going to teach you 4 main things. One, how this is being, this is the story of Ragnarök retold. I'm going to explain to you how writers and TV show writers, they don't think up original ideas. What they do is take ancient stories, replace the characters in the stories with modern characters, and then rewrite some creative, you could take any pantheon and turn it into a comedy, a fantasy show, a horror movie, and it's just the same stories that are retold. A lot of these stories go all the way back to ancient Greece, and they're just retelling of the same stories. It goes in with sitcoms, TV shows, and all that. Hollywood is not too creative when it comes to high-end fantasy writing, and yes, most fantasy novels are based on ancient mythology, but just then... what we're going to do is go through here and I'll tell you the main characters of Game of Thrones. For example, Robert Baratheon is Thor. How does the wars start in Game of Thrones? That's when during Robert's rebellion, he kills the Targaryen with his hammer. Yes, that comes right out. That is the start of Ragnarök. I'll also go over a little bit of the Ragnarök Viking mythology with you. Although Ragnarök itself would probably be better in another video on its own, so I'm not going to get into too much detail. 2, I'm going to explain to you the difference between a wyvern and a dragon. And I'm going to show you who the real reptilians are in Game of Thrones. There is a character in there called the quote-unquote faceless men who have the ability to change or shapeshift. Yeah, sound a little familiar. So if you're not familiar with the type of work I do, this might be a little bit too in-depth into the occult and reptilians for you because at core I'm an occult and reptilian researcher. Now, Game of Thrones has been really doing a bad job at pulling the Ragnarök themes through, especially last season, season 7, with the lack of direwolves in the show because the wolves are a very big part of Ragnarök. However, HBO, because they spent most of the CGI budget on dragons and can't think of creatively of using maybe like a real wolf animal actor in the show instead of CGIing everything, because it's a very important part of the story. Also, I'm going to tell you a few other things that they left out of HBO that quite possibly could happen in the books, which also is part of the Ragnarök story. So, like I said, if you're not familiar, now before we start, this was made for me from a good friend of mine, Crazy Badger, or Honey Badger as he goes by. That is Kinney Von Darien. Yeah, so I'm showing you right now. That's Beric Dondarrion with my lizard avatar head put on top. That was made as an avatar for me. So if you're wondering why is there a lizard head on Beric Dondarrion's body with a flaming sword? Yeah, that's because this is, like I said, this is not the kind of decoding or research work that you might be used to. So if you're new to the channel, welcome. As a reminder to my returning subs and everything, people know every day I grind out putting videos, but YouTube still makes it very difficult for me to make a living. So thank you to all the donations recently and anyone who supported us on Patreon. And if anyone is able to support us, even when I give videos that are monetized, people know YouTube will put my videos up for monetization review like they did with Elizabeth Bathory recently. Not pay me on the first few thousand views and then release the copyright, the monetization review claim. So they're basically extorting money off YouTube creators. It's bad. Whatever. This is what YouTube does to people. Whatever. And I'm not going to talk about Google right now. So I'm assuming that if you're watching the video, you have either read the books or watched the TV show on HBO. And you're at least familiar with the characters. I'm not going to have time in this video to go over the characters, but we are going to go over the main characters and how they tie into the gods and giants of Ragnarok. Now, Ragnarok is the apocalypse story in their pantheon of the gods. There are a few pantheons that pagans like going by. There's no doubt in my mind that George R.R. Martin himself is probably in a secret society or a pagan, because that's just the truth of things, and I wouldn't doubt it, especially, getting a show. Yeah. But, he definitely knows his ancient mythology, and he knows his mythology when it comes to shape-shifting reptilians, because I'm going to prove that also. And what I said about Daenerys Targaryens and her dragons specifically is not... In Ragnarok, it involves serpents. A snake is considered a serpent. So, yes, a wyvern. In case you're wondering, this is what a wyvern is. A wyvern has 4 limbs. Their arms are attached to their wings like a bat. A dragon has 6 limbs. And there's no doubt in my mind that George R.R. Martin knew this. And if you're a fantasy writer and you don't know this, you need to go back to Fantasy 101. Dragons have 6 limbs. Wyverns have 4, and their hands, just like the dragons from Game of Thrones. This is a wyvern. It's not a dragon. Yeah, I know they call her Mother of Dragons, and this is what everyone's been calling him in the show, including myself, but I actually know that they are wyverns. They're not dragons. Who are the dragons? We'll get to these guys in... I'll do this last. The Faceless Men of Bravos. They come from the House of White and Black. There's a little signature into the occult there, or the black and white symbolism. And yes, they have the ability to shapeshift once they acquire the faces of their victims. It ties into reptilian shapeshifting. And if you know anything about the mythology of Game of Thrones, the House of White and Black has roots from Valyria. Now, Game of Thrones didn't do this in the show because they said that the actress, Emilia Clarke, I believe her name is, couldn't wear the contacts, but Daenerys Targaryen's eyes are actually supposed to be purple in the show, because the Valyrians in the mythology of Game of Thrones actually have roots of coming from another planet. And she has Valyrian blood. Ties in with the Anunnaki mythology now. Yes, it's all right there in the mythology, if you read the books. The Valyrians were not originally from Westeros. So, I'll give you a little outline here, too, of some of the symbolism in here. As you know, this is the tree in Game of Thrones that Bloodraven is attached to in the show. Now, the Raven in Game of Thrones is the trickster. That is Loki. We'll get into the characters in a second, but you know the three-eyed Raven? That is Loki, the trickster god. But the tree in Game of Thrones that the three-eyed raven is attached to here is Yggdrasil. Now, I'm going to be butchering a lot of Nordic words in this video because if you know me, I do videos from every pantheon, from China to Japan to Sumeria. I'm not an expert in every single language on the planet, and I don't think anyone can actually claim to be. But it's more about the things I teach, not linguistics. I'm not an English teacher. I'm an occult researcher. Big difference. But there are meanings behind words, and I get into that sometimes. So this is what you're looking at. This is Yggdrasil, who protects the 9 worlds in Nordic mythology. Here's where it gets really interesting. Ragnarok starts at the beginning of the time of man. Man wars against himself. We have the 3-year winter. Yes, winter is coming. That's a long night. Yes, there's a long winter in Ragnarok. Ragnarok involves these characters here. The world serpent rises up. That is Yugamander. That is who is being represented by Daenerys Targaryen's serpents. Hell summons up the spirits of the dishonored dead to fight. That is the White Walkers. The ice and fire giants rally against the gods. We do have giants in Game of Thrones. They come from beyond the wall. Loki, the god of mischief, escapes his prison, and that is Bloodraven, where I just showed you is attached to the tree. That is Loki. And Fenris the wolf escapes his bonds. Yes, the wolves, House Stark. They're symbolic of the wolves in Ragnarok. And what happens first during Ragnarok is the world freezes. It's exactly what's happening now. The assault on Asgard, the forces of good and evil. So basically, all the characters and houses that you have in Game of Thrones are being represented by Nordic gods. What's interesting, the god that Jaime Lannister plays in Ragnarok actually loses one of his hands. And didn't Jaime Lannister lose one of his hands in that show? Now, I don't know if the HBO producers, when they picked up Game of Thrones, I highly doubt it because, in my opinion, they're not too talented in Hollywood writing. I don't know if they knew at first that George R.R. Martin was using the story of Ragnarok for his story, because it would have been a little easier for them to figure out how it ends. So, we have all the characters here, the White Walkers, the serpents, the giants, Loki, which is the 3-eyed raven, and the wolves. And this is the Viking apocalypse story, the end of the world. And then what happens at the end of Ragnarok is the world floods. Sounds a lot like the Great Flood in mythology. And then the waters recede and spring begins. A Hope for Spring is George R.R. Martin's last book title, by no surprise. Now, the only thing different in Ragnarok, which HBO, I don't think, is picking up on, and there was a theory floating around with fans that, to stay true to the Ragnarok theme, that when the ice wall is melted in his books, that is what is going to cause the flooding of Westeros, all that ice on the ice wall. Now, there are other characters in the books that are not being covered in HBO's Game of Thrones, and there are mer people in the books. Yes, like mermaids, fish people. It's speculated that Varys, the eunuch, might be one of them. Yes, there's some mythology going on there, some strange stuff with the characters. And that their idea was to flood the world so the fish people can take back Westeros. There's a few theories floating around. The most solid one is the one that's based on Ragnarok. So I can pretty much, a lot of the fan theory conjecture, because some fans are using the books, some fans are only going by the TV show, and there's a whole world of difference in there. And there's only 6 episodes coming out in season 8. I don't expect HBO to really... it's probably just going to be big glorified CGI battles of the White Walkers, and I pretty much tell you how it's going to end, if you haven't figured it out yet. So, this is I'll put this link in the description. Now, this blog poster has done a lot of research, a lot of it, as I'm scrolling through here, a lot of posts on the Nordic mythology and Game of Thrones. I will leave all these in the description, because this is just too long to read. Going through the text and looking at it here, this would take me 2 hours to read alone. We don't need to do all that. But the link will be in the description. The only post I am going to read is the first post they made on this blog, in 2013, where they basically compare that George R.R. Martin, yes, is using Ragnarok, the Song of Ice and Fire, that's what it's called, and we'll go over some of the characters here, and you'll see how George R.R. Martin. Then after I read this, I'll show you one of the, well, I could do that first, because here's the idea. You have an ancient story. You take that story, like Ragnarok, with all the gods and all the giants, and you give them new names. And then what you do is you turn those gods in, let's say you want to put it in a fantasy setting like Game of Thrones. You make Robert Baratheon Thor, and you go use the story of Thor in Ragnarok, which is what he did. Robert kills a Targaryen at the Battle of the Trident, and that is the start of Ragnarok. Up until the season we are now, where the White Walkers come through the wall. So basically what you do, and they have a lot of these ancient fables in Greece, which are used by people in Hollywood and people who write TV shows that the same story told over and over. So you have your type of conflict: human versus self, human versus human, human versus nature, human versus environment, human versus technology, human versus supernatural, human versus gods. Unfortunately, all the nobles in Game of Thrones are actually not humans. They're either giants or gods, and we're going to go over that list of them in a second when I read that article. And then you have the plot: overcoming the monster, rag the riches, the quest. There was a better one that I found before. I can't find the website, but it actually had more of a list. It's like human versus magic, human versus monster, human versus... Second thing you need to write a good story, you need what is called a MacGuffin. What is a MacGuffin? That is a literary device in which all your characters are trying to acquire, which progresses the story forward. In Game of Thrones, the MacGuffin is the Iron Throne. Period. That's the MacGuffin. That's it. So the MacGuffin is what presses the story forward. You'll notice a lot of movies or TV shows, what's happening? You have characters trying to get to, or sometimes a MacGuffin can actually be a person. Maybe it's a person that, like in an action movie, who's a bad guy who everyone's trying to get to and kill. He's the MacGuffin. Or it could be an object. It could be a device. It could be... That's what it's referred to as a MacGuffin. So when you have a MacGuffin and your basis of a story and conflict, you can use some of the older fables from Greece, and you just replace the characters with modern characters, and you can pretty much write any story you want. And these are done over and over again in Hollywood. In fact, Hollywood's become so pathetic in recent years, they're only remaking older movies anymore instead of just... Yeah, we know that they've always used to steal older stories and retell them. So that is how George R.R. Martin would be using Ragnarök, except he just made it a little more obvious right in front of people's faces. He wanted people to know that he was putting the symbolism in there for those who want to see it. I'll put this link in the description also. This is a story that will tell you what Ragnarok is. I'll do a separate video in the future on Ragnarok. I also have a hard time pronouncing a lot of the Nordic words, but I do have a friend from this area that might be able to help me out in some of these pronunciations. One of the things I just want to show you, you'll notice in the Game of Thrones, this was another clue. A lot of the characters have names that begin with TY, like Tywin and Tyrion. That's another reference right to the gods from the Nordic pantheon, the TY. That was another big clue. So, who are the gods? And who are the giants in the Game of Thrones? Well, let me read this. What is Ragnarok? It is, quite literally, the song of ice and fire. Well, what is this song? Is it a song of battle? Do notes fight one another for dominance, with no care or concern for the overall sound? No, that is discord. A song is harmony, notes working together in unison. And that is Ragnarok, the forces of ice and fire uniting as one to attack the world of gods and men. And the key to understanding what's really going on in George R.R. Martin's epic fantasy series, A Song of Ice and Fire, upon which the popular HBO show Game of Thrones is based, assuming my theory is correct, of course. If it's not, then I'm just delusional, but it should be entertaining either way, so by all means, read on. The battle is not dragons versus White Walkers. It's dragons and White Walkers versus mankind. Prior to Ragnarok, the world is plagued by civil war, rampant immortality, patricide, fratricide, and disease. A long winter that engulfs the world, known as Fimbultur, 3 simultaneous winters without end, winter is coming, before the ensuing apocalypse erupts. As Ragnarok, giants, Jotnor, not giants as we think of them, but elemental beings, who inhabit the realms of ice and fire, unite under the leadership of the bound god Loki, the trickster, that's the 3-eyed raven, and his monstrous offspring, Fenrir, the bound wolf, and Jormungandr, the world serpent, and Hel, the queen of the dead, to do battle with and slay the gods. All the major figures of the Norse pantheon are foretold to perish in the ensuing chaos. Odin, the mad god. Oh, we have a mad king in Game of Thrones now, don't we? And guess who that is? Yes, that's Aerys Targaryen. See how easy it is to figure out once you Odin, the mad god, shall be swallowed by Fenrir. Thor, the storm lord who wields a mighty warhammer. Yes, isn't that what Robert Baratheon did at the Battle of the Trident? Shall fall to Jormungandr. Ty, the one-handed god of single combat. That's Jaime Lannister. Remember when he gets his hand cut off? That was a very important scene to tie in with Ragnarok. Shall be torn to shreds by Garmor, Hell's Hound. Friar, the Phallic lord of virility, shall fall to the fire giant Sutra, the Black, and his fiery sword Heimdallr, the Watcher, shall die at the hands of Loki himself. When all this is said and done, only the children of the gods shall remain, and Odin's son Vindir, in particular, whose name means vengeance, shall tear Fenrir's jaws asunder and avenge his father, after which the world shall be rejuvenated and life shall start anew. Now you got to also realize, obviously, George R.R. Martin is not following Ragnarok exactly to the T. He's had a great deal of creative flexibility in there, as with most people. He's just using it as a basis for the story. So, who are the gods? To see how this relates to A Song of Ice and Fire, we must first identify who is who and what side they're playing for. It's not quite as straightforward as you may think. Now, the gods in Game of Thrones. Odin is, and all these gods are from the Viking Norse pantheon. Odin is Aerys Targaryen. Thor is Robert Baratheon. Ty, the one-handed god of combat, is Jaime Lannister. Frey is Walder Frey. Heimdallr is Samuel Tarly. Frigg is Cersei Lannister. Freyja is Marjorie Tyrell. Idun is Sansa Stark. Bryhinder is Brienne of Tarth. Norjordur is Theon Greyjoy. Kasavir is Jojen Reed. Baldur is Joffrey Baratheon. And Vindar is Tommen Baratheon. Now the giants in this, the elemental giants, are Loki is Bloodraven. Fenrir is Bran Stark. Jormungandr is Daenerys Targaryen, the serpent represented by her 3 witherns, or serpents. Hel is Melisandre. Of course, she's she's more or less a blood priestess, or the pagan priestess in that show. Sutor is Jon Snow. Hati is Arya Stark. Fafnir is Tyrion Lannister. Garmor is Rickon Stark. And Hiram is Victorian Greyjoy. At the heart of the story lies the trickster god Loki. Although he's occasionally depicted favorably, he's generally a devious character in Norse mythology who works against the gods. He is a shapeshifter and is able to take the form of birds, fish, insects, and even the mist. In addition to this, he is the embodiment of fire. Fire in the occult is passion, if anyone don't know, and is the father of wargs, which is an Old Norse word meaning monstrous wolf, in reference to his son Fenrir. Due to his part in murdering Baldur, Odin and Frigg's favorite son, Loki, was banished from Asgard and bound into a cave as punishment, where he is to remain until he breaks free at Ragnarök. Also of interest, the mother of his 3 monstrous children, Angrboda, is a giantess who lives in an ironwood where she raises Fenrir. So, I'm not going to read any more from the blog. It's actually pretty well written if you want to come and read this yourself. Like I said, it's a lot of reading. They get into a lot of the mythology. But I'll leave this link in the description. There's a few blog posts that they've made here on the connections between the Nordic mythology and what they're using as the basis for Game of Thrones. So, yes, Game of Thrones is based on Ragnarök. There's no disputing it. Now, how it's going to play out in season 8 of HBO, I'm looking forward to watching it, but I'm not looking to be. They screwed it up really bad. Let's just admit that. And they've left a lot of characters out too. You got characters that are alive in HBO's Game of Thrones, like Beric Dondarrion, who are not alive in the books because, well, I'm not going to spoil too much for people. So on to Daenerys. Yes, it's pretty simple. Fantasy 101. This is a wyvern. Wyverns have 4 limbs, and their arms are on their wings, just like the Game of Thrones dragons. A proper dragon has 6 limbs. So the reference to the dragon is actually a reference to Draco, or the shapeshifters from the Reptilian Empire, Alpha Draco star system. I believe in Game of Thrones they were referred to as Valerians, which is why it would make sense for them to have purple eyes, tying in with the theory of reptilian shapeshifting and Han Purple I covered. Purple is a very close color associated to reptilian royalty, so it's no secret there. I believe in Game of Thrones, the entire Targaryen bloodline is nothing more than the Sumerian Anunnaki bloodline that he's going through. Now, there's some more theories in the story of Ragnarok, which I'm not going to hit on, and they deal more with the alien species involved. Loki and some of the trickster gods are thought to believe to be the tall white Zeta Reticulan aliens, the mean, nasty tall whites that we know are working behind the scenes with government, in conjunction with the Alpha Draconian reptilians, who are, of course, represented by the dragons or serpents. So when they say gods, you're actually talking quite possibly humans. The undead, that's a little tricky one to figure out. Now, the wolf is one of the 7 evil spirits out of Babylon. I shared that in the video yesterday I made on the 7 evil spirits. It makes sense why the wolf would be involved in Ragnarok. And we have the army of the undead, which is nothing more than the White Walkers. So for the last part of the video, the faceless men. Now, these are, like I said, if you're watching this video, you've watched the TV shows or read the books, so you know about the gentleman who's been training Arya Stark to become a faceless assassin. He teaches out of the House of Black and White in Bravos, and they have the ability to shapeshift when they get these faces. Now, you could look at that metaphorically as being nothing more than human DNA, and reptilians doing what they do, taking human forms and deceiving people. But yes, it more or less is shapeshifting. And I'll show you why these are the reptilians in the Game of Thrones, because they follow a different religious pantheon that revolves around a goat god, or Baphomet, as you might say. And it ties in with, I believe they have 9 gods in their, well, sorry, messed my camera up there. Yeah, alright. There we go. That's better. Um, the Faceless Men are a religious society of assassins who worship the many-faced god of death. They are based in the House of Black and White in the free city of Bravos. They claim to have originated in the Valerian freehold. Phrase associated with the cult of the many-faced god is Vala Margulis. Now, what I noticed about Valar Margulis, it sounds to be very Latin influenced, which no surprise there. The High Valerian, for all men must die. The traditional response to this is Valar du Horses, or all men must serve. I'll leave this link in the description also, but what we're more interested in is their religion right here, because this is all you're going to need to know to understand the Alpha Draconian association I'm making with them. And so when you read this, followers of him in many faces consider death to be part of the natural order of things and a merciful end to suffering. According to the guild, the god is present in many religions under different names. They claim he is called the Black Goat in Kohar, the Lion of the Night in YT, and the Stranger in the Faith of the Seven. The Seven ties in with the 7 evil spirits of Olympus and Sumeria that I made yesterday. There's always a method to my madness when I make videos. The Faith of the Seven, no doubt, that's a direct reference to the 7 evil spirits. The Guild's House of White and Black, different reference to the occult, as above, so below, symbolism in the black and white checkered floors in all Masonic lodges and in all secret society lodges, because you need a black and white checkered floor to do summoning rituals and open portals and talk to these trickster gods. That's what I call them. Has a large sanctuary that contains a pool of black water, idols of many death gods, and altars with candles, and small alcoves along the walls that contain stone beds. Some visiting worship light candles to their god, then drink from the pool using a stone cup, and go lie in one of the alcoves. The religious order refills the fountain with a poison so that drinking from the fountain leads to painless death. This is sometimes referred to as the gift of the many-faced god. Now, many-faced god, that should be a clue right there. A many-faced god is obviously a god that has the ability to shapeshift and change form at will. Some alcoves, called dreaming couches, have special candles that bring visions of the past for a sweet and gentle death. When a body is found, it's checked to see if the person is completely dead, and then serving men will take the body down to the vaults. The acolytes will strip and wash away the bodies, which are taken to the lower sanctum where only the priests may go. Every morning at dawn, one of the priests leads the acolytes and novices in prayer as they kneel around the black pool. There's another prayer at evening. Other than that, there are no formal services, no songs or paeans to the god. Sometimes a worshiper will ask to speak with a priest, who will meet with them in the sanctum. The priests wear cowled robes, black on the right side and white on the left. Other direct occult as above, as you know, this black and white symbolism. Acolytes' robes have no cowls and are black on the left side and white on the right. Novice wearers wear a black and white robe with a black under tunic. Servants of the temple wear a tunic of undyed wool, baggy breeches, linen small cloths, and cloth slippers. Blind acolytes are common in the House of Black and White. Now, just going through here. Yeah, this society originated in the volcanic slave mines of Valeria. I told you the Valerians in this are more or less extraterrestrial. They have purple glowing eyes. They were supposed to do that in the HBO Game of Thrones, but Emilia Clarke didn't like wearing the contacts. So they let her just have she doesn't have but in the story, yes, they have purple eyes. Now, I'm not going to go through too much more of this. There's so much mythology that to cover. I mean, you know that the books are pretty well detailed and quite long. So there's, of course, HBO had to cut out a lot of the stuff, but I think they should try to stay as close to the Ragnarok theme as possible. Just the, they don't have to end it the same way that George R. R. Martin is, but they understand how Ragnarok plays out. Then they could easily write this story. I'm sure George R. R. Martin told them that. So I'm assuming the writers of the HBO series Investigator looked into Ragnarok. I'll make a video in the future going into more detail of the Viking pantheon. I haven't made too many videos on the Vikings yet. There's a few interesting topics that come around this area. One dealing with Celtic mysticism out of Ireland, and two others dealing with the Vikings, because there's a lot of interesting mythology in here. Look at a lot of names in here too that are just difficult to say, but I will make a video in the future on Ragnarok. Now, where else Ragnarok was featured and Thor was featured, and this goes into the alien aspect. Any fans of Stargate SG-1 series? Do you remember the little alien gray? His name was Thor, Supreme Commander of the Asgard Command. Thor, to keep the serpents from coming through the Stargates, or the Gauld. He put a device on the Stargates known as Thor's Hammer, and that was the name of the episode. I told people in another video, I believe that was a piece of organite, or symbolic of organite. So then the Gauld couldn't travel through the Stargates anymore, and reptilians are alert. Well, they can't be around organite. So there goes another TV show that was based off Ragnarok, and some of the characters from Ragnarok. So is Thor and Loki and some of these gods, are they actually the tall white alien greys? Possibly. There's some more metaphors going on behind Ragnarok, which is why I want to do it in a separate video, so I don't have to mix too much alien mythology in with fantasy mythology, if you get what I'm saying at with this. But this is the Ragnarok theory. I won't take credit on. That's originally, well, I could figure it out if I really had to. But I give that credit to the writer here at the blog for figuring that one out. But Daenerys Targaryen not being the mother of dragon and being the mother of wyverns, I take credit for that one. Because I can't believe no one hasn't pointed that one out yet. Yes, dragons have 6 limbs, period. I'm not even going to argue that one. A dragon has 1, 2, 3 legs, and the wings are separate on top. As a wyvern is like a bat, where their arms and wings are the same limb. And we all know that the dragons in Game of Thrones have their arms on the wings. They're wyverns. They're not dragons. The dragons are the faceless men who have the ability to shapeshift. If they're the ones who worship the goat god. And of course, Blood Raven is nothing more than symbolic of Yggdrasil, the tree of life that connects the 9 Nordic worlds in Norse mythology. So I'll leave all these links in the description. Game of Thrones Season 8 comes on April 14th this year, which, let me see. Okay. I was trying to blow up my screen. I don't think I can actually do that in Screencast. Why it's actually recording. Maybe not. But anyway, no big deal. I'll leave you with my Kinninigan. I love this pic. Yeah, that's my, that lizard head used to be my old avatar and my old Kinninigan channel, so some people may recognize that. And that's why that was made for me. But, that's just another example of a character who isn't even alive in the books, because Beric Dondarrion died when he gave Lady Stark, after the Red Wedding, the kiss of life and resurrected her, and she's walking around as a zombie now, taking out revenge on all the Lannisters and all the Freys. So yeah, there's so I just really want to go over the mythology that George R. R. Martin's using. What a dragon is, what a wyvern is, and who really are the reptilian shapeshifters being symbolized in the Game of Thrones, a song of ice and fire. Anyway, that's all for this video. This will be in my Mysto-Synchronism playlist with other TV shows and movies I've decoded. Any questions or comments, leave them below. Again, if anyone's able to help us out with donations or support through Patreon, anything is appreciated. It's becoming harder and harder every day at YouTube. Um, I have been thinking of some solutions though, so don't worry, and I'll probably work on that next week. I've been noticing a lot of. I actually have a T-shirt store set up at Zazzle.com, except their T-shirts are a little pricey, so I think next week I'm going to look for vendors, and a lot of people were asking me about getting Kinninigan or my logo printed on T-shirts, and I might just do that. I noticed a lot of YouTube content creators have like Teespring scroll down Merc tabs under their description now. So I'm going to do a little research and find out how to get that tab on my videos. And I got quite a few logos and art from Kinninigan. Hey, we'll make some Lizards on the Scene t-shirts. I don't care. Whatever you guys want. So if I have to compensate, you know, with Patreon and through merchandise, I don't mind doing that. In fact, it's something that when my corporation was set up, it was set under actually, yeah, electronic commerce, well, internet commerce. So we planned on doing that anyway. Anyway, any questions or comments, leave them below. And until we speak again, this is Kinninigan, and take care.